Good morning, Angel. I am so happy and privileged to be able to tell you a little bit more about my life story. Um, First, I want to begin with saying a little bit about you and our relationship. I am wearing a hoodie that Santa Claus brought me for Christmas this year, or last year, and it says Grandma and Mimzy and Kiwi. This is by far my favorite article of clothing. I absolutely love it. It makes me feel close to you when you're not around. And I'm thrilled that Santa knew what would mean so very much to me. So I want to tell you about a couple weeks ago. You were over and you were spending the night, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and you were getting tired. I was kind of tired, but I shut off the TV. And normally I had the TV playing when we're sleeping. Um, I shut the light off and I wrapped you in my arms. And you had your arms around me, and you love to have my hair in your face or to be hanging on to it. And you were doing that. And we were nose to nose. We were looking in each other's eyes. And like I said, it was completely dark. I had the lights off and the TV off. And I just laid there and experienced you and your energy. And a few minutes into it, say 5, 10, I I couldn't tell where you began and I ended. It was a transcendent moment for me. We were one. Now, I know that I am at one with everybody on the face of the planet. And I'll go into explaining a little bit more about my beliefs in that way or the truth, the facts of that. But I had never really experienced that kind of oneness before. And wow, it was incredible to experience that kind of oneness with you because I love you so much and you are so, so precious to me. So now I want to tell you a little bit about my grandparents, the ones that raised me, and the complicated kind of history of my half sister, Julie. So I was raised as an only child, which meant I was kind of spoiled materially. I got a lot of what I wanted. However, I was a pretty unhappy kid. I was a fat kid. Um, but let me start with my grandparents. They were both born in 1916. My grandmother on February 12th, 1916, and my grandfather on February 20th, 1916. Um, they experienced the Depression and they grew up in a very rough time in America. I'm not sure what year they got married in. Um, but they got married young, and I had pictures, lost them in my active addiction. Oh, they were incredible pictures. It was my grandfather in a suit standing, and he was so very handsome. He had a hat on, tall, slim. He was rocking that suit. And my grandmother was in a beautiful wedding gown, and she was rocking that as well. She was a beautiful woman, but I lost that. Like I said, it was in a storage unit. My grandfather had been in the Navy, and there was a picture of him in his naval uniform. And a man in a uniform is just like pretty intense, pretty handsome. And it was one of my favorite pictures of him, and that was also in the storage unit. And because of my active addiction, I did not pay for anything other than drugs. Maybe gas and cigarettes, gas for my car to get down to cop drugs. And I had let the bill on that storage unit get so far behind that they locked it on me, and they auctioned it off to somebody. And I was absolutely heartbroken. Heartbroken. A lot of my really sentimental things were in there. I could have cared less about the four-poster bed and all that. It just did not even matter at that moment. Those pictures really mattered to me. I'm going to say it was like in the 80s, 1980 something. Um, Probably 87, 88. I don't know. I lost track of time. I used drugs for 22 years. I shot heroin IV. The first time I shot it was in 1980, and I got clean, like clean, clean, stayed clean for 17 and a half years in 2002. So that means I shot dope for 22 years. And I was very consumed with it. I will tell you absolutely more about that, but I want to get back to my grandparents. Um, they married, they stayed married for several years, and they got a divorce. And they ended up both marrying different people. My grandmother married um, a man, I saw his pictures before. I think his name was Gene something or Stephen. It was Stephen Fudge because my maiden name is Fudge. I grew up as Jill Fudge and Jill Marie Fudge. And I can't remember his name, but that is when my grandmother had my dad. Your great, no, your grandpa, no, your great grandpa, and my grandparents were your great grandparents. Um, and my grandpa married someone, have no idea what her name is, but they had a child, a little girl. Her name was Rosemary. And then they both got divorced from those spouses that they had children with. And from what I understand, the woman that my grandfather had married had moved to California after they got divorced and took Rosemary with her. So my grandfather never seen his daughter again after the divorce. And that was kind of heartbreaking to him. I almost feel like I kind of took her place. I don't know, he never really talked about how he felt about that, but it had to be heartbreaking. And my grandmother, um, as you had seen in that picture in one of the other videos, was a single mom for quite a while. And then my grandpa and my grandma got remarried after they had divorced, married other people, had kids, then they got remarried. So, I mean, my grandparents loved each other. They had a lot of issues, but people have issues when they're married. No question about it. And my grandfather embraced my father as his own when he was younger. But then, he grew up to really, really be a burden to my grandparents, and he caused a lot of problems in their marriage. But my grandfather was phenomenal. He really was. He was my hero. See, in my dysfunctional family, and it was pretty dysfunctional, he was the only one that didn't hurt me. He, to be honest, wasn't really super engaged with me. We had periodic moments. One of my, and this goes back to one of the other videos I was telling you about when I was younger. And one of my first memories, besides drinking the beer, the tuds out of the beer, was my grandfather coming home from work. He worked in Livonia. We lived in Detroit, not far from Tiger Stadium, the old Tiger Stadium. And I smelt the hot dogs from Lafayette, Coney Island down there. That was kind of a thing, a special thing for us down there. And I remember waking up to the smell of Coney Islands. And I was right. It was the Coney Islands because I got up and we ate hot dogs and Coney Islands. And I'm not sure what else we did, but I do remember the Coney Islands. I was only like 2.5, 3 years old at the time. And I remember drinking the tuds. And then as I got older, as I had told you, we lived in Detroit on Cochrane until just before the riots happened. Then we moved to Garden City. So once we were in Garden City, my grandfather, almost nightly, he would go up to Charlie's Bar. It was maybe 6, 7 streets from us, um, right next to a party store, Charlie's Party Store. And he would go to Charlie's Bar, and sometimes he would take me. And those were special times. I really, really loved going with my grandpa. They had a jukebox there, and two of my grandfather's favorite songs were Red Roses for a Blue Lady I think Dean Martin sang that, and I have that on my Spotify as well. And Tony, Orlando, and Dawn tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree, and he would play those, and it just was really special. It was an opportunity for me to talk about some of the issues I had at home, and I knew they'd be kept in confidence when I told him. Yeah, he, I don't remember my grandpa ever missing a day of work. That man worked every single day. He was up at like 5 in the morning, drinking coffee. I'm not sure what time I'm thinking he had to be to work, about 7. Um, and I told you he worked at Plastomer Corporation in Livonia off 96, and he was a supervisor there. By the time I could remember anything, he was a supervisor. And I remember times he would take me to Plastomer, like on the weekends, and I was so impressed going to where my grandpa worked. And there weren't usually anybody else there, but they had these kind of like go-karts there. It was a big place, it was a big factory. And I'd get to ride around with him on these little go-karts, and that was a lot of fun. Um, as I got older, I can't remember exactly. I'm going to say maybe 12. I did meet one of his, well, I met several of his coworkers. But one of them was named Keith. And oh, I had a crush on him. He just seemed very cute to me. He was very nice to me. So I would kind of get dressed up when I went, and I knew he would be there. Um, yeah, I really enjoyed that. He had another coworker named Anna Hampton, and she was an African American woman, and she had 2 girls, and Anna and her 2 girls came over to our house a couple times when we lived in Garden City, and that was always very cool. Um, my my favorite dog, my best friend growing up, Skippy. So, mm, the very first dog I ever had was Sally, Sassy Sally. And I got pictures here. This was Sally, and this was her son, Skippy. This was my best friend. And so I'll tell you about Skippy. I guess I'm not gonna be able to keep on one subject, Kiwi. I guess I'm gonna be all over the board as issues come up and I want to tell you about them, or people, or dogs, or so Skippy would play hide and seek with me in the house and outside, and he was an extremely smart dog. He knew to come and find me, whether I was hiding under blankets, in a closet, behind the garage. Skippy knew how to find me. He knew how to let me hide before he tried to find me. I love that dog. I taught that dog how to walk on tires as they rolled. I taught him how to. My grandmother, when she was in one of her crazy ass moods, had threatened to get rid of Skippy, and that freaked me out. So I taught Skippy how to climb a fence. I stood on the other side of a fence and just, come on, boy, come on, Skippy, come on, until he came over that fence. And I continued to teach him how to jump that fence because I thought if he knows how to jump a fence, climb it, and jump it, he could come back to me. So my grandmother never got rid of him in that way at that time, but I sure made preparations for it. He would be out in the backyard. We had a pretty big backyard in Garden City, and I would kind of taunt him, get him, go, Skippy, go, and he would run around the backyard. There was pretty much a dent where he in the dirt around where he would run when I would do that. He was a great dog. And the reason I thought of him when I talked about Anna Hampton, my grandpa's coworker, because when my grandmother and grandfather lost a house in Garden City, I'd already moved out. They had me get rid of Skippy. I had to drive him to Detroit to Anna Hampton's house. Supposedly, Anna had agreed to take him. And I pray to God that's what it was. However, I know that if Skippy was going to be put down, somebody else would have had to take him to do that. I'm gonna cry. I am crying. Because Skippy knew. He knew what was happening when I put him in that car. He began howling. He never howled. He howled all the way to Hannah's. And I was hysterical. I was begging his forgiveness for doing it. It was really, really, really hard for me. I pray they took care of him and loved him. I lived in an apartment. Your dad was probably 16. I lived in a place called Broham Manor, and the woman, the office manager there, believe her name was Sue. Her and I got to talking one day, and we had very similar spiritual beliefs. And she had invited me to this place called the Spiritual Temple on Greenfield between 13 and 14 Mile. She said that I'd really like it. So one Sunday she called, and I was in the middle of going to school, and there were like books all over my table. I was in the middle of writing, I don't know, 15-page um, paper on something, you know. It was a very, very intense time in my life. I was working, I was going to school, but she said, take a break and come with me. So I did. I went with her, and this was really a unique kind of place, the spiritual temple. So I get in there, and there are two women standing with stools in front of them. And they ask, would you like Reiki? And Reiki is when it's aura smoothing. Our aura is the energy field that we have because we are energy beings having a human experience. And the energy is around us. These people never touch our bodies. If they're doing Reiki, they just smooth the energy field. So my first reaction was, well, how much is that? And they said, it's free. It's just part of the service. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I sit down, and the woman starts, she does like this. And she goes, oh my God, you have so much stress. I thought, wow, how can she hasn't even started. She just put her hands like that. But I really was stressed. And as an adult, sometimes stress builds up so slowly that you don't really even realize the magnitude of where that stress is going, that level. So she did her little smoothing all over my body. And at the end, I got up off that stool. I was so stress free. I felt different. I felt relaxed. I didn't even know how stressed out I really was. So I sit down. I'm sitting on the end of an aisle next to Sue. Um, and there's about 25 people there in the area where people sit. And there's a platform up front. And there's 4 or 5 people up there. And I'm not even knowing what's gonna happen here. She hasn't given me any details about this kind of service. She just said I'd like it. So it starts. And there are some readings about energy and spirits and things like that. And one person gets up and begins saying, closing their eyes and saying, if somebody have anybody who is passed that has the letter J in their name or starts with a J, and somebody would raise their hand and they would go on to say, well, I have a James here. Do you have a James in your life that they passed? And the person would say, yes. And what he's telling me, so these people up there are supposed to be able to contact the spirit world, the other side, where people go when they're deceased. And all four people had gotten up, and they hadn't done anything or said anything that really clicked with me, but it was pretty impressive, you know? And then all of a sudden, one of them said, "You," and they were pointing at me. A dog just ran down the aisle and sat right next to you. Does this mean anything to you? I'm like, oh my God, it's Skippy. And they said, it's a black dog and he's looking up at you. And I knew it was Skippy. So I am convinced that I will see Skippy and any other animal I've had that has passed when I pass. In fact, my great hope when I pass is that I will be surrounded by animals and babies and young children. And in my experience throughout life, that is the only place unconditional love resides, is within animals, children. There is nothing more important than unconditional love. Of course, God, the universe. But in earthly terms, it is animals and children that have been my saving grace. I love animals so much, Kiwi. That's really special to me, and I pray that they are really special to you. I have other animals that I'm probably going to cry about, but I wanted to tell you about Skippy. So my grandma and grandpa, I have pictures of them as well. This is chubby, chunky little me. This is my grandpa, Gordon Harvey Crooker. And this is me and my grandma, Helen Marie Crooker. And this is Gene Stephen Fudge, the man they call my father. My grandma. My grandma was a very, very good grandmother. She protected me. and loved me at all costs. You figure back in the 60s when my grandparents fought for custody of me, it was a lot of money to hire an attorney and a private investigator to follow us around, my mother and her, I don't know, significant other, to me, insignificant other. Um, it was a lot of money. And um, my grandfather paid for it all because my grandma didn't work and my dad never worked well, he maybe worked once in his whole life. I remember sitting on my grandma's lap a lot when I was younger. I remember her taking me everywhere she went. We had a great relationship when I was younger. But then I got older, and not so much. Um, there was a lot of tension because of my father, who I couldn't stand. Um, in another video, I had told you about how my experience with going to school in Garden City was, and how I started out with that sailor dress on, and how nobody at school on the first day was dressed up but me. And as you saw, I was I was getting pretty big. And when I was 16 years old, I weighed 230 pounds. I remember I was watching a football game with my grandfather, and the statistics, the stats for the football players were being put up there. And one of them weighed 230 pounds. And I knew that's what I weighed. And that blew me away. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I thought, you gotta be fucking kidding me. But because my last name was Fudge, and because I was fat, I got hell in school, Kiwi. I was made fun of mercilessly. Nobody played with me at recess. I standed next to the wall. No teachers ever asked, is everything okay? Never came to talk to me. Even the other kids that were the misfits of school, one had a cleft palate, another one was heavy set as well. They were accepted to one degree or another into the groups, or they had their own groups, but no one ever accepted me into their group. It was very lonely. I remember in second and third grade going to school and my separation anxiety from my grandparents was off the charts. My stomach was sick. My mind raced. I couldn't focus because I was afraid something would happen to them while I was at school. And if anything happened to them, what would happen to me? I would have no one. So for years, I was afraid when I went to school. And because of that anxiety and being made fun of every day, I missed a lot of school. A lot of school. In fact, the school contacted my grandparents at a couple points to say that my truancy, not going to school, was excessive and there would be consequences if I continued to miss school. I can remember there was a street, maybe 4 houses from me, called the Path. It had been a road one time, a thin road. Um, I'm going to say 2 lanes of traffic, big, but there were barricades there. So it was the path that we would walk, children, to the school, Marquette Elementary School, 4 streets away from me. And I can remember a safety guard. A safety guard had been walking behind me on the way home from school. I was going home, and they started hitting me across the legs with their safety belt. And I told them to stop repeatedly, and they just kept doing it. And there were other kids around that thought it was so funny. Of course, I was humiliated. I was scared. But when I made it home, I never told anybody those kinds of things. It was too embarrassing. It's difficult to tell you these things, Kiwi, but I want to be 100% honest about my life. Then I would get home, and my father lived with us from 2nd grade. I told you he showed up in chains and black and a beard, and he lived with us from then on. And he would make fun of me too. It would have nothing to do with my last name, Fudge, because his last name was Fudge, but he would brutally make fun of me because I was fat. Even though he was the reason I was fat. So I could not escape. I couldn't escape it. I dealt with it all day at school. And then I came home and had to deal with it. So I learned at a young age to just stay in my room and hang out with Skippy because Skippy was safe. My grandfather was safe. And there was one girl at school, her name was Kathy Bostwick, and I really didn't like her. But my grandma, she drove me to school every day, and that would be made fun of. But can you blame me? The horrible things that would happen to me when I didn't get a ride to school and I had to walk those 4 blocks. So my grandmother took me, and we'd get there early and we'd sit in the car and talk or listen to the radio. And she would always pick me up for lunch, almost always, and take me out to eat. And one day, for some reason, Kathy Bostwick ended up going out to lunch with us. My grandmother invited her, and it was kind of fun. It was kind of fun having somebody went to school with me. And when we got back to school, she was a safety guard. We dropped her off at her safety guard street, and I got out and walked from there. And she came up to me and said, "Don't tell anybody I was with you at lunch. I don't want anybody to know I was with you." It hurt. It hurt a lot. I was in 4th grade. Maybe it was 5th grade. Mrs. Stone, my husband, your grandfather, and I got high with her son after, of course. I just found out that, we just got high with him, and I went to his house one day and seen her. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe you were my 5th grade teacher. But we were in school, and she was teaching, and all of a sudden we got this, I got this smell, this whiff of poop. And others in the class got this whiff of poop, and they immediately attributed it to me. They started saying, "Fat fudge shit her pants." And they started laughing and making fun of me and saying that it was coming, that smell was coming from me. And I'm thinking, did I poop my pants? Did I shit my pants? What? what is this? It can't be me. I don't feel it. And I had no idea what the teacher was teaching. I was so wrapped up in this crazy fear and humiliation again. It went on for the rest of the class. I'm not sure if we broke for lunch or recess or something. And it turns out another girl in the class had shit her pants. Sue Green. Nobody ever said, Jill, we're so sorry we did that to you. We're so sorry we made fun of you for an hour and said horrible things to you. But they were very nice to Sue Green. When they found out it was her, she cried. And they were very nice to her, which I think they should have been nice to her. It must have been horribly painful for her. However, they should have maybe been nice to me as well. But they weren't. When we had gym class, caused me great anxiety because I wasn't able to do the majority of things that were done there, whether it be tumble, um, cartwheels, um, climb a rope. You gotta understand, I was really fat. I couldn't do those things. And it gave another reason for the kids, because children can be so very, very cruel. And would give them another reason to make fun of me that I couldn't do the things that were required of me and Jim. So I would do everything I could to miss gym day. Some days I had to go. But it was horrible. I really hated school. I did pretty well. I was pretty smart and I am pretty smart. I don't remember taking a book home in high school. I quit school in 10th grade because of I finally could quit with the way people tortured me for years. I quit. And I quit with a 3.5 GPA. The counselors called me and said, what are you doing? Why are you quitting? And I'm just like, I'm done. I'm just done. They enrolled me in night school, and it went for a few weeks, but that didn't work for me either. I eventually went back and got a GED at 20 before I started shooting dope. My grandfather lived to see me get that. I was so excited to show him I got it. And I scored pretty well on it. Back to when I was in school, I know I was still in elementary school, so I'm not sure if it was fourth, fifth, sixth grade, but we were learning square dancing. and you had to pick a partner. And as usual, I was the last one picked. One of the popular kids, Mark's 4, got to his class late, and I was the only one left. And he was so cruel. He was so mean. He had to grab my hand, swing me around, or do-si-do, or whatever it was, and he would just grab it so tight that it hurt. He hurt me doing that. The same thing kind of happened when there was dodgeball, baseball, any of those things where you got to pick teams. I would always be the last one picked, even though there were other kids that were either overweight or cleft palate or were not that clean. Everyone got picked before me. I remember one time we played baseball, still in elementary school, 5th or 6th grade. I got picked last, but somehow I got to pitch. Could have been overseen by a teacher or something, because I know the kids would never have allowed me to pitch. They didn't really want me to even play. They would have been much happier if I stood against the wall. Somehow I got up to be a pitcher, and I really pitched well. And they were all cheering me on, and I had a moment in the glory. I might have lasted one inning. In the minute, the first pitch that was not great, they took me out. They didn't give me a chance to redeem myself after that one bad pitch. I say all that to say, as I mentioned earlier, then I'd go home and not tell anybody and listen to that shit from my father, from Gene. I stopped calling him father a long time ago, Kiwi. Not only did the kids at school make my life miserable, he made my life miserable. Thank God I had that dog. Dog was my savior. And my grandfather was my savior. I've already been talking 60 minutes. I'm going to go a little bit farther than I'm going to end for this one. Uh, my grandfather had been seeing the doctor. He had been having some issues, I'm not even sure what. I was probably 11 or 12. And they had him on blood thinners. One was called Coumadin. And they had prescribed too much of the Coumadin for him. And he was at work. And he started bleeding from every orifice of his body because his blood had gotten so thin. His nose was bleeding. He was just choking it up out his mouth. And he drove home like that. He drove home all bloody and everything. When he got home, of course, he was rushed to the hospital. I was in school, and they kept him. They kept him for what seemed like a very, very long time. And I remember having to wait in the hospital. They wouldn't let me up to see him at Garden City Hospital. But what I would do is I would go around to the grassy area. It was actually grassy with hills on it in the back. And he would come to the window and wave to me. Blow me kisses. I'd blow him kisses. And then I would kind of perform for him. I would roll down the hills and dance around, do whatever I could. I loved him so much. Could not be with him. I have no idea how long I hesitated. I remember so my grandma couldn't take me up to the hospital. She was up there all the time. And I'm sorry, Kiwi, but I gotta light a cigarette because I'm just like real emotional. Sometimes I wouldn't have to go to school or like on the weekends when my grandma was up there. A woman named Lee, who I remember is doing our ironing. She was hired to do our ironing for a while. And then when this happened to my grandfather, she was the one that watched me. She took me to her house. She was a big woman. She had a couple girls that were quite a bit older than me, so they really didn't want to have anything to do with me. They were no company or anything. They didn't play with me, or neither did she. I was just kind of left on my own. And I think, if I remember correctly, she took me to the hospital where we waited for my grandma to come out and she was going to take me. And we got to talking. And she told me my grandfather wasn't my grandfather. He wasn't my blood grandpa. this had never been brought up to me. Of course, I know it now that he wasn't really my dad's Jean's father, but I didn't know it then. I was only 10. But she told me, your grandpa's not really your grandpa. And that really messed me up. All of the things that have happened to me in my life, Kiwi, have influenced me greatly. I have very little trust of other people. I am not comfortable with a lot of people around, like parties and gatherings, big family gatherings. I've lived with men that have had big families. None of that is comfortable for me whatsoever. I don't trust. Even now at 62, those things from a very early age have jaded me, closed me off to some experiences. Or you could say I have allowed them to jade me, allowed them to cut me off from other experiences, that family gatherings, parties, things like that. So it can be construed as if they are the reason, or I have allowed them to be the reason. Probably more accurately, I have allowed them. Perhaps someday it will be different, perhaps not. All I know right now, Kiwi, is I am comfortable and joyful with you. I love nothing more than to care for you. You are fun, you are smart, you are beautiful beyond words. Your eyes, they say eyes are the windows to the soul, Kiwi. And man, you got some eyes. Beautiful, beautiful, striking, piercing blue. And I am comfortable with my animals. Bear Paw, Willow, Benny. He's a bit challenging at times. I think I think at this time I wanna tell you about my grandfather's death. First, I want to tell you about this tradition that we had. Him and I. truly one of the most meaningful traditions we had was making a stew, depression stew, called slum gullion. And he began teaching me this when I was probably 3 years old. And every fall and winter, we would make this together. And I will leave you the recipe for it. I still make it. So you start out with like a layer of hamburger, then you slice potatoes, and you put onions in it, and then you put a layer of stewed tomatoes, a layer of kidney beans, and then a layer of peas, and you start over. Meat, potatoes, onions, um, stewed tomatoes, kidney beans, and peas until you fill this big pot up. And then you season it. With each layer, you season too. You put salt, pepper. I probably put more seasoning in it than my grandpa did. And then you let it cook and water. You rinse the cans of the kidney beans, peas, and stewed tomatoes with water. You put a can of each after you rinse out the can. And then you cook it for hours, 6 hours, if not more. Um, and it is so very good. Now, um, I use a pound of hamburger and I also use a pound of sausage to kind of give it a little bit of extra spice, a little extra flavor. But my grandma never made it. Only me and my grandpa. And those are very happy memories. So, my grandparents had moved out of the house in Garden City. They were living in an apartment on Wayne Road, Forest Apartments or Forest Lane Apartments, something like that. And I had moved out, obviously. I was living with my half sister. And that's a whole nother story. That's a very complicated story. Um, and my grandpa had invited me over to make some gullion and have it with him. And I told him, no, I'm going out. I'm going out with my sister to the bar. And before I was going out with my best friend, Beth Bilo, best friend at that time, and my half sister, Julie. And I'm at Beth's house, and I'm kind of waiting for her to get ready. And I get a phone call. And it's my grandmother. And she tells me my grandfather's died. That he had been sitting in the living room at the apartment, his chair, watching TV. And all of a sudden he said, I can't see. A blood clot in his brain had burst and he couldn't see. So EMS was called and they came. They took him away and he was pronounced DOA, which means dead on arrival at the hospital. He had already died by the time I got to my grandma's. I feel like I was kind of like in shock. I stayed the night with my grandma and slept in my grandpa's bed. They slept in twin beds, so I slept in his bed. And that night, before we went to bed, we called some important people in our lives and let them know that he had passed. I still had not cried. And again, my father was there. Gina was there. He was always there. And the next day, we had to go to the funeral home and plan his funeral and pick out the casket, buy the flowers, and let the cemetery know that he was going to be buried there. That was pretty difficult. And the next day was the funeral. And they let the family in before everybody shows up. And they opened the doors. And my grandpa was laying in his casket. And I took one look at him. And I said, that is not my grandfather. Where is my grandfather? That is just his body. He is not there. Where is he? And that's when I cried because that wasn't him. That was not him. So he was laid out for 3 days. And in that 3 days, a lot of people came. And the third day was his funeral. 2 of the days was the viewing. So people came, neighbors and stuff. On the third day, a very old man showed up. I didn't know who he was. It turns out he was my grandfather's brother, one of them. In my entire life, they did not talk. My grandfather had no contact except for one of his brothers, Ted, who lived up in Algonac. Another story for another time. And I asked this man, like, all these years, you never reached out to my grandpa, and you show up at his funeral? And he said he wanted pay his respects. Made no sense to me. Still makes no sense to me. And not only did he show up, the place he worked, Plastomer, the big factory, they shut the entire place down so everyone could come to my grandpa's funeral. My grandpa was loved by many. And there were many people that came up to me to tell me that the sun rose and set with me. He loved me dearly. I miss my grandpa. I wish he could see you, Kiwi. He would be so in love with you. My grandma, too. I almost feel bad telling you about this part of my life because it was so not happy, joyous, and free. It was very troubling. But like I said, I do not want to lie to you about anything about my past. I want you to know the way it was. And also, I've shared about how it is and the joy of you. You are absolutely everything. My greatest joy, Kiwi. I also like the names Bug Bug for you and Little Little. What your dad calls you. So, Little, I'm done for this video. I hope you understand. Maybe it helps you understand me a bit better. But just know this is all the past. Okay? I love you, Angel. You have a great day, okay?